Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Big Apple Blitz. What's going on? Matt O'Leary alongside Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how's it going this morning?
You know, it's a little bit slow now after some busyness at the beginning of the week with the Giants obviously deciding to retain Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. Now I feel like I'm just playing a waiting game here. Are they going to fire Mike Kafka and Shane Bowen? What's the option if they do? So in the meantime, though, I think it's kind of exciting to look around the NFL and see how the coaching carousel is taking shape, and then also preview early free agency and see if there's anybody that the Giants could target for immediate upgrades. So it's definitely going to be a fun and long offseason ahead, but I can't wait to get it started.
Absolutely. And on the Jets side of things, the list of head coaching and GM candidates continues to grow each day. It feels like some more names get added to it. I believe the latest count is at 14 GM candidates and 14 head coaching candidates, which is just an insane list. And, you know, I guess credit to them for doing a deep dive here. We'll see how the results end up. But wanted to talk about one in particular because there's a Giants connection, and this is the latest ad on the head coaching side. Steve Spagnuolo won a Super Bowl with the Giants in 2007, came back and was the defensive coordinator again for that 2015, 16, 17 era, and then was even an interim head coach for the Giants after they let go of Ben McAdoo. So obviously want to get your perspective on it as he spent a ton of time with your franchise.
Yeah, I'll first just say 14 GM candidates and 14 head coaching candidates is almost, I would say, ridiculous, but at least I can give the Jets credit for doing due diligence and casting a wide net, because that is something that I said they need to do. Cast a wide net, go through a thorough process. At least that's what they're doing. Now, some of the names on the list I feel like aren't real contenders for the position, but hey, again, due diligence is important. But Steve Spagnuolo, I think, is really interesting because this is a guy who I feel like doesn't want a head coaching job. He hasn't really expressed much interest in it in the past, even though I believe he is a perfect candidate for a head coaching job. I think he's one of the best coaches in the NFL. Obviously, he's had a tremendous amount of success as the defensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, he had a ton of success as the DC for the Giants. But even when he was the interim head coach, this was a guy that everybody was able to buy into. He's a guy that's held in very high regard in New York, New Jersey, especially inside of the Giants organization. And I think that he really, truly does deserve a head coaching job somewhere. He hasn't gotten one yet. He had his chance as the interim for the Giants. The Giants still sucked, even with him in the interim, but he didn't really have a lot of time to prove himself in that audition. But I do think that Spags is among the top head coaching candidates, whether or not the wide media believes he is. I think that the Jets will come away thoroughly impressed if they do end up speaking to him as they've requested. And I think that he should be a top contender for this job.
Honestly, when I did my video reaction to the news yesterday, I said, and I don't think this is hyperbole, I think he's one of the best defensive coordinators of all time. I mean, he has 4 Super Bowl wins as a defensive coordinator, 3 with the Chiefs, 1 with the Giants, has had success now in multiple stops, first with the Giants and then now later on with the Kansas City Chiefs. And the last couple of years, the Chiefs defense, I think, has really been a big reason why they're such contenders. You know, Mahomes is still great, obviously, but the offense isn't, you know, as elite as it once was, early on in Patrick Mahomes' career. The thing that scares me a little bit, and it's a small sample size with the Giants, but in the 3 years he was in St. Louis, it went about as bad as humanly possible for him from 2009 through 2011. He went 1-15, 7-9, and 2-14 for a 208 win percentage. Now I get it. The roster was really, really bad, and that's part of the equation too. The defense was also horrible the 3 years that he was there. So I'm not saying he doesn't deserve a second chance. Sure. I think if you had a first stint, it didn't go well. I think you absolutely can get higher down the road, and it's been a long time. I mean, 2011's 14 years ago now. But that does give me a little bit of pause, and the unknown of like looking at Aaron Glenn, for example, who comes from the defensive side that hasn't been a head coach before. At least he doesn't have that 212 win percentage as a head coach in 52 games. And I know there's a little bit more nuance and conversation to just, hey, here's the number. He won 21% of his games, which is horrible. But that does give me a little bit of pause when talking about him as a candidate in this search.
It's a good factor to bring up, and it's understandable to have some pause about that. But I will just point to something that you already mentioned. That was over a decade ago, a decade and a half ago. I don't even think that it's comparable to modern day, even. I think the NFL has changed so much in those 15 years. So whatever he did 15 years ago as the head coach of the Rams is almost, I don't even know how to bring it into the conversation because things have changed so much. And because you have to assume so much experience that he's added on to his resume since then would inform a better go around in his next head coaching job. At least that's the way that I look at it. Additionally, just context on that LA Rams, or I guess they were St. Louis Rams at the time team, they were terrible. They had a terrible roster, and ownership and management was an absolute mess. Obviously, that's one of the many factors that went into them relocating to LA. He was the coach of a dying franchise. And I think in some regards, that's probably why that team performed so poorly. And I think more of the blame deserves to be placed on ownership and management than it does on Steve Spagnuolo himself, who, again, as you mentioned, one of the best DCs of all time, has proven to be one of the best strategists and coaches in the league history. And I will say to that point, nobody is more inventive from the DC position in the last 20 years than Steve Spagnuolo. The NASCAR package, we see it all the time now across the league, invented by the man himself, Steve Spagnuolo. If you don't know the NASCAR package, I know Giants fans know exactly what that is, but Jets fans may be unfamiliar. That's where you take all the defensive tackles off the field, all edge rushers, 4 down linemen, maybe even 5. You just put every pass rusher you have on the field at once on 3rd and 4th downs, and you get after the quarterback. That's how the New York Giants won those 2 Super Bowls, because they were still using the NASCAR package even when Spagnuolo wasn't there afterwards. They still used it, but in those Super Bowls in particular, that was a major catalyst to success. So I always view him as a guy who is an ultimate strategist, knows how to put the players in place to succeed on the defensive side of the ball, and is always progressing and reinventing himself. And because of that, I think that 15 years ago, that experience is a valuable one to him. And if he had a second chance at a position, because he's always reinventing himself, I think that he could get it right his second time around. But the real key here for Steve Spagnuolo, if he were to be hired as a head coach, would be to hire a damn good offensive coordinator. I don't think his mind stretches to the other side of the ball. He needs to make sure that he gets the right guy in place to handle that side of the ball. Otherwise, he could end up with another 21% win percentage.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next point to bring up is I'm curious to see what kind of staff he would put together. Now, again, obviously a really long time ago, his offensive coordinator in St. Louis was someone else you know very well, Pat Shurmur, which did not go great. And the last year, he was there the first 2 years, and the last year the OC was, give me a second, Josh McDaniels. So 2 guys who have done the job for a while. I wonder if he would go back down that road, although McDaniels, I believe, has been linked to the Patriots with Vrabel. So I don't know about that one, but is there anyone on the Chiefs staff that really jumps out? I'm not really too familiar with, like, I don't know, their quarterback coach, David Girardi. He's been in the job for a year. I don't know if there's anyone else on that staff that he's pulling with him to be an OC.
I'm not sure. I'm pulling up the staff right now. I haven't really given much thought to that, in complete honesty. But I mean, obviously, their offense hasn't been as great as it was in the past this year anyway. Maybe their pass game coordinator, Joe Blymayer, I'm going to assume that's how you say his name. I don't know. But obviously, passing game coordinators often like to take the jump to full-time OC. So maybe he could be the guy. And, you know, I think that generally speaking, though, for the Chiefs, I think we know that everybody on that side of the ball for the offense is a strong mind who's working under Andy Reid and is gaining valuable experience. So probably you could see Spagnuolo pulling somebody from that side of the ball on under Andy Reid's coaching staff and making them an OC. But I also think that he's a guy who has been around the NFL for so long he's shaken hands with so many people that it would be difficult to project who he would hire as his OC because he knows so many people in the league. He could get so many letters of recommendation and think back on the last 15 years that he was here, and he could find somebody that he's rubbed hands with. So it's tough to project who Spagnuolo would bring on as his OC, but I do trust, because of all the experience that he has, he'd be able to find a pretty good guy for the job.
Now, I want to pull up the list of names while we're talking about it. I got to remove the banner here because it's so long. It goes beyond where that covers. But for me, I think I would put him somewhere around the middle of the pack here. Like, I'd probably put him ahead of Darren Rizzi, Brian Flores, Nagy, Vance Joseph, Arthur Smith, who I don't know if, Arthur Smith's on this list, and Bobby Slowick. So I guess that's roughly middle of the pack. Is obviously kind of putting you on the spot here, but of the list of guys that the Jets have interviewed or plan to interview, how high are you putting him up on this list of candidates?
I would say upper middle of the pack, but you mentioned that you probably prefer him to Brian Flores, and I found that interesting. What's the rationale there? Because I know that Flores is a really hot name. A lot of people really like him, think he deserves another chance as head coach. Why do you have Spagnuolo over Flores?
I would not put him over Flores. Rizzi, Greasy, Nagy, Arthur Smith, Vance Joseph, Bobby Slowick. I'd put him over.
Okay. What about Josh McCown? I know he's pretty intriguing. I think more people prefer him as an OC, though.
Yeah, I think I look at Josh McCown more as an offensive coordinator candidate, but I will say that I'd rather be a year early on an offensive guy, kind of like Kevin O'Connell or Zach Taylor, someone who wasn't an offensive coordinator. He was either a quarterback coach or some offensive assistant. So I would prefer McCown, I think, over Spags, even though I think this is more of a McCown for bringing him in with his interest in offensive coordinator than I think of him as a serious head coaching candidate. One of my favorite options actually is Brian Flores as the head coach and him bringing McCown with him as the OC.
Yeah, that's one of mine as well. I think that what you said is perfect. You'd rather be a year early with that than a year late, because if you're a year late, then you lose out on the opportunity. I don't know, though. Looking at this list, like, I can tell you who's near the bottom: Riverboat Ron, Arthur Smith. Those guys are bedrock to me. I'll say I don't know like anything about Brian Greasy, so he's probably towards the bottom. Matt Nagy as well, all the way down at the bottom. Guys at the top, though, I think you're looking at Vrabel, you're looking at Glenn, obviously Flores, and I think Spagnuolo is probably pretty close to the top. I don't know how much of a believer I am in Joe Brady. That could just be PTSD because of Brian Dable, though. Yeah. I'm not sure. So maybe you need an outside perspective on that one. Bobby Slowick, I think, is somebody I'm intrigued by, but ultimately not necessarily thrilled by. And Rizzi, I don't view as a serious contender for the job. So I guess Spagnuolo would probably be in my top 5 or 6 for this position if I really had to break it down. Notice I didn't mention Rex Ryan. I don't want to. But the other guys, that I mentioned, top 5 or 6, I would say, is where Spagnuolo lies.
I like Joe Brady, and not just because he's Josh Allen's OC, but to me, what I look at is how much their offense changed last year when they went from making the change at offensive coordinator and putting Joe Brady in that spot, and then obviously this year they've been super elite. But I like Joe Brady's work at LSU with Joe Burrow. And I know the stop in Carolina didn't go great, but I thought it was an interesting hire by Matt Rule at the time. And I think I do view him as an up and coming name. So I would put Joe Brady's probably my favorite offensive option here. Like Nagy and Arthur Smith, retread options that I'm not really all that interested in. Bobby Slowick, really popular name a year ago, but that Texans offense took a big step back. I think they need a bounce back year before he's looked at as a serious contender for the job, in my opinion. And then for Josh McCown and Brian Greasy, I think they're both more OC candidates. Greasy's the quarterback coach for the San Francisco 49ers the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think those are all interesting names. I like your points on Joe Brady, though, as him being this up-and-coming guy. For what it's worth, I really liked him as a potential addition to Brian Dable a couple years ago before he ventured off a different path. I really would have liked him there. I will also mention, though, with Spagnuolo, because it just kind of reminded me, we were talking about guys to pluck from that Kansas City Chiefs coaching staff. That's what the Giants did for Mike Kafka, and that hasn't necessarily worked out either. So maybe what I was saying earlier about knowing that they're all bright minds on Casey's offensive side of the ball working under Reed, maybe I have to give that some second thought as well, because I don't really know how I feel about Mike Kafka. So
Valid. That's definitely valid. I think we might see an offensive coordinator change for the Giants. I believe, you correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Mara mention that he doesn't want Brian Daboll calling plays?
he said that he had a conversation with Dable about being open to giving up play calling again. I don't think he really said his opinion one way or another, but he said that him and Dable are having conversations about it, and Dable confirmed that. So we'll see how that goes. Team's a mess. I don't know.
Totally fair. So long list of names. Spags, one of the more recent guys added to it. We'll see if they add anyone else. Wanted to get into our Giants conversation now because you texted me about wanting to prove or make the case rather for Justin Fields coming to the New York Giants. And with the Giants holding the number 3 pick, they might have to go the veteran route. So why Fields?
Well, I think Justin Fields, I'll put it plainly, if I could pick one free agent for the New York Giants to sign this offseason, it would be Justin Fields. I'm that high on him entering this free agency class relative to what I think his price tag is going to be, to what the New York Giants' needs are, and what I think his ceiling could be. All of those factors combined, which I'll try and explain, make him the number one guy that I would target. But I will say, you kind of mentioned picking number 3 might not be able to get the quarterback, might have to go the veteran route. Even if the Giants are picking number 3 and taking a quarterback, I still want Justin Fields because I view him not only as a quality bridge, but also as a potential, if you can unlock something, franchise quarterback. But this is the thing, and this is the easiest way I can break it down. At his absolute worst, Justin Fields is a bridge quarterback who can start 8 weeks in a season for you and win a handful of those games, like he just did this past year in Pittsburgh. I think he made about 8 starts. I think he won 6 of those games, if I remember correctly. He played well enough to win games. He looked like a legitimate starter, and he looked like maybe there is a corner to be turned from him and his talent. So I like him at the bare minimum being a quality bridge for half the season. But you have to also think, if you're looking at that as the worst case scenario, the best case scenario is he's the next Sam Darnold. And I know it's kind of hard to project who the next Sam Darnold is. And I know those guys don't come around that often, but they're becoming a little bit more common. You had Geno Smith with a career resurgence. You had Baker Mayfield with a career resurgence. And now you've had Sam Darnold. If you have to bet on anybody who's going to hit the open market this offseason being the next reclamation project turned franchise quarterback, that easy bet is going to be placed on Justin Fields. He has never had good coaching. He has never had good talent around him. This season, I think he got pulled from the starting position too soon. And now if you're watching these press conferences that Arthur Smith and the Steelers are doing, it kind of sounds like they secretly wish Justin Fields still was in the starting lineup to me, because he creates a more dynamic offense for them. So I believe that Justin Fields, there is more to unlock. I think there is developmental upside. He's not old. He's still young, and he still does have a world of talent. He just needs to find the right guy to coach it and bring it out of him. So I like Justin Fields because of the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, both being attractive options.
Yeah, so Justin Fields started 6 games for Pittsburgh, went 4-2 as a starter, 5 passing touchdowns to 1 interception, also had 5 rushing touchdowns, so 10 touchdowns in 6 games, had a 93.3 passer rating. They didn't throw the ball a ton in the games that he started, which is kind of on brand going back to his days in Chicago. But I think, you look at the success that Sam Darnold has had in another spot, Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith, all names that kind of jump out right now. And I think a lot of teams are going to be interested in finding that next guy. And I think Fields could be that next guy. What kind of price tag do you think he comes at? Is it like the contract Darnold got this past year, which I believe was 1 year for $10 million, or do you see something a little bit different?
I see something a little bit different because I think with Darnold, he was a backup for the last several years, and he was getting paid to be a backup. Justin Fields was a starter at some point this season and has been a starter in the past and has found more success than I think people give him credit for as a starter in the past. So 1 year, $10 million, I think is going to end up being too low. I think a lot of Giants fans are going to expect him to get 1 for 10. I think he's going to get closer to 1 for 20. And I think that might be considered by some an overpay. I think it's hard to call that an overpay at the quarterback position when you trotted out Tim Boyle, Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito, and Daniel Jones this season. I think you do the 1 year, $20 million, and it's probably not fully guaranteed anyway. So, and listen, when you are the New York Giants and you are this bad of a team, every free agent you sign, you have to overpay in order to convince them to come to the New York Giants. So overpay Justin Fields, give him the money that he deserves, and if he balls out on that 1 year deal, you franchise tag him. That's going to be a $45 million contract at the bare minimum, therefore making that $20 million a bargain. So, and I know it's kind of difficult to project bargains because, again, Fields could end up being paid 1 year, $20 million and only playing 8 games. That's why you halfway guarantee the contract and you make it incentive laden. He has to start all 17 games to get the $20 million, however you want to set it up. If he only starts half the season, he gets a bare minimum of $10 million. That's something I think Fields would agree to. He's betting on himself at that point. That's something I think the Giants would welcome. And again, it creates a contract that's similar to the Darnold deal, but because he's got a little bit more experience and starting upside and success, I think he commands a little bit more money. But I think there are ways to make that money incentive laden in that contract and ultimately sign him still for a contract that I think is reasonable.
I like that point that you brought up with the incentive laced contract. I think that's the way to do it. I know some Jet fans are in on the idea of bringing in Justin Fields. I think if it was closer to that Sam Darnold price, that makes a little more sense if Aaron Rodgers is gone. But I don't know if they're going to be able to afford that kind of price tag. I think if Aaron Rodgers is moving on, you're probably looking at, Tyrod Taylor, Jordan Travis, and then another veteran backup who's making, more in that $5 to $10 million range than being able to afford someone like a Justin Fields if he's getting up towards $20 million. But are there any other teams around the league where you look at as like competitors for Justin Fields? But because I think if you look at the Giants and their potential for him to come in and play right away and be the starter, I think it would look appealing to him to go there.
I think it would be appealing. I think there are going to be other competitors. I think the Steelers re-signing him is an option for Fields. I mean, we'll see what happens with Russell Wilson. Potentially he hits the market. Steelers might be a situation that he wants to go back to. I don't know, though. Let's see how they perform in this upcoming playoff game. Other teams that come to mind, the Titans could be another one. Callahan might be attractive to be coached under. The Browns could be attractive in some respects because they've got a good receiving core. But I think the Giants and the Jets as well, but I think the Giants have the most to offer Fields because even if they draft a quarterback number 3 overall, they're not going to want that quarterback to start in week 1. They need to win games early in the season in order to save some jobs. So at the very least, at the bare minimum, Justin Fields will be the week 1 starter. And then it's up to him to keep that rookie off the field. Bet on himself. And I think that's attractive to Justin Fields. And again, then maybe you create a situation like Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy, but that worked out pretty well for the Vikings. If you are the Giants, you are welcoming a Sam Darnold, JJ McCarthy situation here. So, and then on top of that, I think there's 2 other main selling points that if you're the Giants, you pitch to Justin Fields. Number 1, you're throwing the ball to Malik Neighbors and whoever else we sign in free agency or draft. But Malik Neighbors can make a really bad quarterback look good on a bad day. Tim Boyle looked decent in that game when he was throwing the ball to Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors scored a touchdown on a back shoulder fade. It was a terrible ball. He made the adjustment, and he added those stats to Boyle's season. So throwing the ball to Neighbors is going to be attractive for every quarterback that the Giants are marketing toward this offseason. On top of that, I know Giants fans have personally soured on Brian Daboll. I don't think that players in the NFL have soured on Brian Daboll around the league. I think Justin Fields will look at all of his options. We'll look at a Callahan. We'll look at a Stefanski. We'll look at whoever the Jets hire, and we'll get to Brian Daboll and say, okay, this guy helped turn Josh Allen into a perennial MVP. All throughout his career, he has touched every quarterback and turned them to gold in one way or another. Sure, you could say Josh Allen's an anomaly. Maybe not, though. He also helped Daniel Jones have the best season of his career, which earned him $160 million. Well, I guess $90 million guaranteed at the end of the day. Fields is going to look at Daboll's track record, helping quarterbacks get paid, and I think he's going to say, okay, that's the guy who might have the best chance of unlocking the talent that I know I have in me. Let me see if I can sign here, have him develop me for a year. I either become the face of the Big Apple for the New York Giants as their franchise quarterback, or I develop into something better than what I am right now and I get paid elsewhere. That's what Brian Daboll, Malik Neighbors, and the New York Giants franchise can offer Justin Fields.
I like that point. Justin asked in the chat, What's up, Anthony? Speaking of veteran quarterback, I was watching something on WFAN when Evan Roberts mentioned to Tiki Barber about possibly acquiring Aaron Rodgers to be a mentor to a young quarterback. I don't think that's something you'd be all that interested in.
Hell fucking no. Pardon my French, but no. Aaron Rodgers and his circus, it doesn't belong in New York. I think that's being proven by what's going on with the New York Jets. And if you think that the media can't handle it on the Jets side of things, wait until the vultures of the Giants get an opportunity to cover that story. It's worse. I promise you. I know that some of the Jets beat writers really get under the skin of you and other Jets fans. Sure. I promise you, the Giants beat writers are far worse. They're far more vicious, and they're far better at taking a nothing story and turning it into a fucking mountain. I don't want Aaron Rodgers to have anything to do with the New York Giants organization. And you know what, though? I don't think it's really going to be an option. I think he's going to retire anyway. And thank you, please, goodbye. I'm sick and tired of this guy.
So obviously not Rodgers, but are there any other veteran quarterbacks who are either available or you think may become available that you'd be interested in for the Giants?
So the number one guy Giants fans like to point to is Matt Stafford. I don't think he will be available, so I think you can cross him off the list. I don't know why Giants fans think he's an option. Truthfully, I'm so confused by it. If he were an option, sure, I would love to bring him over here, but he's not going to come to New York when he's got a good thing going in LA and he's in the final stage of his career. That's how I feel about it. So the next guy who is actually likely would then be Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is washed up. He does nothing for this Giants team. All he would potentially do is be a 4-week bridge, maybe, and help mentor the rookie. But I don't think he wants to go to another situation like the one he just found himself in with Atlanta, then drafting a rookie quarterback after signing him. So I don't even think Kirk Cousins is a legitimate option for the New York Giants either. I think if you're looking more so at a guy who knows he's a backup, a Marcus Mariota, a Jameis Winston, those two guys make a lot of sense for the Giants. They could be a solid bridge, but you can't expect those guys to play 17 games for you. And again, that's why I lean towards Justin Fields. Fields can play 17 games. He can be a legitimate starter if he needs to be, or a bridge at the worst. But those other two guys, Mariota and Winston, they're not going to have the Sam Darnold breakout. They're not going to play 17 games for you. Those are guys that you sign. You probably suffered through some pretty bad quarterback play for the first few weeks of the season, and then you turn the rookie loose. That's not exactly what I want. That's why I'm leaning towards Fields over everybody.
What do you think of Derek Carr? Because there was a report that he said that he wouldn't take a pay cut from the Saints. So I almost wonder if they would just, bite the bullet and cut him. There would be a lot of dead money. It frees up a little bit, like $1 million, and you have $50 million in dead cap. So I don't know if they would actually do it, but is that someone that would pique your interest at all?
Probably not. I think it's an interesting idea. He's quality. He's decent enough. But I think age is a factor. I think that he's starting to age out of the role that I want for a New York Giants quarterback in free agency, which, again, is somebody who I think has upside to start 17 games and be better than they have in the past. And I don't think that Derek Carr has much left to unlock. I will actually point to an older player, though, who I think does have more to unlock. Didn't look like it in week 18. Carson Wentz. I think he's like 30-something years old at this point, but he hasn't really had a legitimate chance as a starter in a very long time. If you're talking about guys who are on the very far cheap end of the market, like a $5 million contract over 1 year, Wentz is probably that price range, and he's probably far more talented than that price would suggest based on what he's done in his career past. And I understand that was like 7 years ago that he was that good. Sure. But still, I think just injuries got in the way of everything. He was a legit franchise quarterback at one point. That could be a guy who I think has a very late career resurrection in the right situation. But still, at the very least, I think he's a decent backup. And that's what I would hope that he would be. I wouldn't bank on him becoming a legitimate starter again. But as a backup with some more upside than a Carr or a Cousins, I think I would point to Carson Wentz as being that guy, and he is a free agent this offseason.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Obviously started in Indy after leaving Philadelphia and was okay, and then kind of, unfortunately had a bad end to that season. They missed the playoffs. Ended up being a starter in Washington for 7 games the next year, and then just bounced around the last couple of years since then. last kind of question that I had for you is because they're now in the market for a head coach, and I kind of wonder what direction they are going. But what do you think of Vegas and their head coaching vacancy and their quarterback situation? And if that has any kind of impact at the Giants, who the Giants have their third pick, Vegas is picking sixth, but just any thoughts on them?
Yeah, I think that, tying it into the Justin Fields conversation, Vegas could be an attractive option to him. There's totally a world where they host him for a free agency visit and Tom Brady's in that meeting and says, let's turn you into a franchise quarterback. And they sell a bridge to Fields and he signs with Vegas over New York. That's totally possible. So they are a competitor for the Giants, both in free agency and the draft. I think that those teams in the top two, obviously, we're talking Tennessee at one. Whether they like Sanders or Ward more is interesting. We'll find that out eventually. But whoever they take, and then whoever's on the board at two, let's say that it's Shador at two. I think there's a pretty good chance Dion sidesteps that and says, no, Cleveland cannot draft Shador Sanders. If that's the case, then I think it's becoming a bidding war between the Giants and the Raiders to trade up to two and take Sanders. And so, in that respect, yes, I think if you're looking at one team that's a direct competitor to the New York Giants, it would be the Las Vegas Raiders, because I don't think the Titans would realistically be in the market for Justin Fields since they do have Will Levis. I don't think the Browns would either since they do have a lot of money tied up to Deshaun Watson. So then if you're looking at the teams that could really pitch to Fields, I think it would be the Giants and the Raiders. And then on top of that, the two teams that really need a franchise quarterback and are out of range for one and might have to get into a bidding war are the Giants and the Raiders. So that's the number one team I think we're competing with this offseason. But you know what scares me? Tom Brady. I think that he could end up being the deciding factor for some of these quarterbacks and making sure that they land a franchise quarterback and the Giants get screwed out of one.
Yeah, that was just a thought that I had because they're in a similar spot to the Giants where they're out of range, right? They're not in the top two. They were for a little bit, and obvious need for quarterback there. So I could see them going the Fields route, or honestly, I could see them trying to give up a haul and get up to the number two pick. And it's going to be dependent on who they end up hiring at head coach. I'm not quite sure the direction that they go, but it's going to be an interesting offseason, man. The fight for a quarterback for the New York Giants I think is going to be a tough one.
It's going to be a tough one. The Giants winning that Week 17 game is a very, very disappointing outcome. Now we're picking number 3 overall. But I will also say there is a wild card sitting out there that we haven't mentioned in this episode. I know Jets fans really like him. I know Giants fans really like him. Tonight, let's see how Drew Aller plays against Notre Dame. Let's see if he wins that game. Let's see if he goes on to win the college football championship. If he does, I would put my money on him declaring for the draft. And coming off of a championship, I would put my money on him going in the top 5 of a weak draft class where teams are eager to just throw a dart at the board. So I think you could keep an eye on Aller. Whether he's somebody that's realistic for the Jets or Giants, we will see. Maybe he doesn't even end up declaring and he sticks true to his word at Penn State. Totally possible. But I will say we're previewing the quarterback market early. I think it's still taking shape, and I'm really intrigued to see what it looks like by the time we get to March and then April.
It's almost surprising to me that Aller's going to go back to school, because you look at this class, I think he would be a lock to go in the top 5 now at this point.
I think you're right, but at the same time, we have seen players do this before, bet on themselves. Justin Herbert being a great example. Herbert ended up going top 5 anyway. He would have gone top 5 in either of those years, and I think for Aller, if he does play one more really solid season of college football, he could go top 1. So that's a possibility for him. Maybe he wants to bet on himself.
We'll see how it goes, but definitely something to keep an eye on. That's going to do it for us in this episode. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new. Check out Anthony's work on Fireside Giants, and you can find me at Matt O'Leary NY. That'll do it. We'll catch you next time.